The man who laughed the loudest that afternoon thought he was mocking a stranger, but within days, he would learn that some insults echo all the way to the top of an empire. Naomi Carter adjusted the strap of her worn handbag and moved carefully through the crowded shopping center, one hand resting protectively on the curve of her stomach. At 29 years old, she had learned how to ignore stares, whispers, and assumptions. Still, some days were harder than others. The food court buzzed with the noise of families, teenagers, and office workers grabbing late lunches. Bright lights reflected off polished floors, and the smell of pretzels and grilled chicken drifted through the air. Naomi had just finished a 10-hour shift and only wanted to sit down for a few minutes before catching the bus home. She moved slowly, following her doctor's instructions to avoid unnecessary strain. Her pregnancy had not been easy, and every step reminded her that she was carrying something precious. As she passed a restaurant near the center of the food court, a sharp voice suddenly cut through the crowd. "Hey, look at that!" Several people turned. A tall man in a manager's uniform stood near the entrance, grinning at a group of employees. His name tag read Tyler Brooks. His smile widened as he pointed directly at Naomi. "That has to be the biggest food court customer I've seen all year." A few nervous laughs followed. Naomi lowered her eyes and kept walking. She had heard worse. But Tyler wasn't finished. "Seriously," he called out loudly enough for half the room to hear. "Someone tell that fat pig the buffet is 2 floors up." This time the laughter spread farther. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others smirked and turned away. A teenager even lifted a phone and began recording. Naomi stopped walking. For a moment, the entire world seemed to narrow into a dull ringing sound inside her ears. She could feel dozens of eyes studying her body, measuring her, judging her. Her fingers tightened around her bag. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to keep moving. Most of all, she wanted to protect the little life growing inside her from the stress that suddenly tightened her chest. Tyler folded his arms proudly, enjoying the attention. To him, she was nothing more than a joke. Just another woman he assumed he understood after a single glance. He didn't know that Naomi had spent months quietly carrying a secret larger than anyone in that building could imagine. He didn't know that every ultrasound photo in her apartment represented a dream someone powerful had nearly given up on. He didn't know that the child she carried was already loved by a man whose name could silence entire rooms. Naomi swallowed hard and resumed walking, refusing to give Tyler the reaction he wanted. Behind her, the laughter slowly faded, replaced by murmurs and whispers. The young man recording lowered his phone. Something about the look in Naomi's eyes had made him uncomfortable. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was sadness, the kind that comes from being underestimated too many times. As Naomi disappeared into the crowd, Tyler shook his head and laughed again. He thought the moment was over. He thought he had won. What nobody in that food court knew was that inside Naomi's womb was the daughter of a Korean Mafia boss, and before long, the entire city would remember exactly what dignity looks like. By the time Naomi reached her apartment building, the afternoon sun had already begun to sink behind the skyline. The old brick structure stood between a laundromat and a corner grocery store in a neighborhood most wealthy people never visited. She climbed the stairs slowly, one hand gripping the railing while the other rested protectively against her stomach. The doctor had warned her only 3 days earlier that stress could become a serious problem. She needed rest. She needed stability. Unfortunately, life rarely offered either. Apartment 3B greeted her with silence. No marble floors. No luxury furniture. Just a small living room, a second-hand couch, and a kitchen table that doubled as her workspace. Yet to Naomi, it felt safe. She closed the door behind her and finally allowed herself to breathe. The humiliation from the shopping center still echoed in her mind. Not because a stranger had insulted her. She had endured judgment her entire life. What hurt was knowing that her daughter would one day grow up in a world where people often chose cruelty before kindness. Naomi lowered herself carefully onto the couch and reached for a framed ultrasound photo sitting on the coffee table. A smile softened her face immediately. The image was grainy and imperfect, but to her it was the most beautiful picture she had ever seen. "You are worth everything," she whispered. "Do not ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Her phone vibrated. The screen displayed a familiar name. Sarah Mitchell. Naomi answered immediately. Sarah had been her closest friend since college, and one of the very few people who knew the truth about the pregnancy. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked. Naomi hesitated. "I have had better days." "What happened?" Naomi looked toward the window. For a moment, she considered hiding the story. Instead, she told her everything. The comments, the laughter, the phone's recording, the feeling of standing alone in a crowd while strangers turned her into entertainment. Silence followed on the other end. "Naomi," Sarah finally said, "you cannot keep carrying all of this by yourself." Naomi knew what she meant. The same conversation had repeated itself for months. There was one person who should have been standing beside her through all of this. One person who had a right to know. But life had become complicated long before she discovered she was pregnant. Ethan Romano had been thousands of miles away in Seoul for most of the year, handling matters that demanded his complete attention. Communication had become infrequent, then almost non-existent. Not because he did not care. Not because he had abandoned her. Circumstances had simply pulled them into different worlds at exactly the wrong moment. Naomi glanced toward a locked drawer beneath the television stand. Inside sat dozens of messages she had written but never sent. Letters explaining everything. Letters telling him about the child. Letters describing every doctor's appointment, every heartbeat, every tiny milestone. She had never found the courage to mail them. "Have you told him yet?" Sarah asked quietly. Naomi looked down at her stomach. A small movement pressed gently. Against her palm. Her daughter. Their daughter. Tears filled her eyes. "Not yet," she whispered. Outside, traffic rolled through the city as evening settled over the neighborhood. Across town, the video from the shopping center continued spreading from phone to phone. Thousands of strangers watched it. Thousands formed opinions. Some laughed. Some expressed sympathy. Most would forget it by morning. But somewhere among those endless views, fate was already moving. And before long, that short recording would reach someone who recognized Naomi Carter instantly. The next morning, Naomi woke before sunrise to the sound of rain tapping softly against her apartment window. For a few peaceful seconds, she forgot about the shopping center, the laughter, and the video spreading across the internet. Then reality returned. Her phone rested on the nightstand beside her bed, glowing with notifications she had no desire to read. Naomi sat up carefully and reached for a glass of water. The pregnancy had entered its 7th month, and even simple movements required patience now. She glanced at the screen. Hundreds of messages. Friend requests from strangers. Comments she had never asked for. Someone had uploaded the video to multiple social media platforms overnight. The view count had already climbed into the hundreds of thousands. Naomi closed the screen immediately. She did not need to see what strangers thought about her appearance. She already knew how quickly people judged what they did not understand. After getting dressed, she headed to a prenatal appointment across town. The rain continued throughout the morning, coating the city in gray reflections and blurred headlights. Inside the medical office, the waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Families sat quietly flipping through magazines while televisions played muted daytime shows. Naomi checked in and took a seat near the window. A few minutes later, her doctor entered with a warm smile. Dr. Rebecca Evans had guided Naomi through every stage of the pregnancy. She understood the challenges better than anyone. During the examination, the doctor reviewed several charts before looking up with concern. "Your blood pressure is higher than I would like," she said gently. Naomi lowered her eyes. "I have been under a little stress." Dr. Evans gave her a knowing look. "Stress is not helping you right now. You need rest, stability, and fewer reasons to worry." Naomi nodded. It sounded simple. Unfortunately, life rarely followed medical advice. The doctor turned the monitor toward her. The image of her daughter appeared on the screen. Tiny hands, tiny feet, a strong heartbeat. Instantly, everything else faded away. The noise of the internet, the judgment of strangers, the uncertainty about the future. None of it mattered in that moment. "She looks healthy," Dr. Evans said. "Very healthy." Tears gathered in Naomi's eyes. "She is beautiful." "Yes," the doctor agreed. "She is." As Naomi left the appointment later that afternoon, she felt a renewed determination. Whatever happened next, she would protect her daughter. The world could say whatever it wanted about her. It would not define the child she carried. Meanwhile, across the city, the video continued its journey through countless phones and screens. At a private security office overlooking downtown Chicago, a man named Daniel Cho leaned back in his chair while reviewing daily reports. Daniel had worked for Ethan Romano for nearly 12 years. Few people knew Ethan better. Fewer still had earned his trust. As he scrolled through updates, one particular video caught his attention. Normally, he would have ignored it. Social media drama was not part of his job. But the moment he saw the woman in the frame, he froze. The laughter, the insults, the crowded shopping center. None of that mattered. Daniel recognized Naomi immediately. He sat upright. His expression hardened. For several seconds, he watched the video without blinking. Then he replayed it, and replayed it again. A quiet uneasiness settled into his chest. Because if Naomi Carter was being publicly humiliated while carrying Ethan Romano's child, there was one person in the world who absolutely needed to see that recording. And at that very moment, thousands of miles away in Seoul, Ethan Romano had no idea that fate was already moving in his direction. Nearly 7,000 miles away, the city lights of Seoul stretched across the horizon like a sea of gold beneath the night sky. Ethan Romano stood alone beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of a private conference suite on the 42nd floor of a luxury hotel. Most people who saw him in public noticed the tailored suits, the calm confidence, and the quiet authority that seemed to follow him everywhere. Very few ever saw the exhaustion. For the past 8 months, Ethan had been buried beneath responsibilities that demanded every hour of every day. Business negotiations, international partnerships, endless meetings that began before sunrise and often stretched past midnight. His schedule had become a maze of obligations with very little room left for anything personal. Yet despite the distance and pressure, one person never stayed far from his thoughts. Naomi Carter. Her photograph remained inside his wallet, tucked behind a stack of business cards. Sometimes, during long flights or sleepless nights, he would find himself staring at that picture longer than he intended. She was smiling in it. The kind of smile that made difficult days feel smaller. The kind of smile he had not seen in far too long. Ethan pulled out his phone and opened an old message thread. The last exchange between them sat untouched for months. Not because he had stopped caring. Quite the opposite. Every time he considered reaching out, another crisis demanded his attention. Another delay. Another promise that he would call tomorrow. Tomorrow had become weeks. Then months. A quiet regret settled over him as he stared at the screen. Something felt wrong lately. He could not explain it. Only that he found himself thinking about Naomi more often than usual. Wondering how she was. Wondering whether she was safe. Wondering if she still believed he had chosen work over her. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Daniel Cho's name appeared on the screen as an incoming call. Ethan answered immediately. Daniel never called without a reason. Daniel. Sir. The hesitation in Daniel's voice instantly captured Ethan's attention. What is it? Several seconds passed. I found something you need to see. Ethan's expression tightened. Is Naomi involved? More silence. Then a single answer. Yes. Ethan straightened immediately. Every trace of fatigue disappeared from his face. Daniel rarely sounded emotional, but tonight there was unmistakable concern beneath his professionalism. Send it. The video arrived seconds later. Ethan pressed play. The crowded shopping center appeared on the screen. The camera shook slightly. Voices echoed through the background. Then he saw her. Naomi. His heart stopped. She looked different than the last time he had seen her. Tired. More fragile. Yet there was something else. Something he could not immediately identify. The footage continued. The insults. The laughter. The pointing fingers. Ethan watched without blinking. The room seemed to grow colder with every passing second. Then the camera angle shifted. For the first time, he noticed the unmistakable curve beneath Naomi's coat. His breathing slowed. The world around him disappeared. Meetings. Contracts. Soul. None of it mattered anymore. Ethan replayed the video once. Then again. His eyes never left the screen. Finally, he paused the image and stared at Naomi's silhouette. A realization settled over him with overwhelming force. The timing. The months apart. The details he had failed to notice at first glance. His hand tightened around the phone. Daniel, he said quietly. How long has she been pregnant? Daniel exhaled softly. Based on what I have learned, approximately 7 months. Ethan closed his eyes. For several seconds, he said nothing at all. Then he looked back at the frozen image of Naomi standing alone in that crowd while strangers laughed at her. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm. Book the first flight home. Daniel understood immediately. Everything had just changed. The flight from Seoul landed just after sunrise. Ethan Romano had not slept for a single minute during the 14-hour journey. While other passengers rested beneath blankets and watched movies, he sat near the window staring at the same paused image on his phone. Naomi standing alone. Naomi carrying a child he had not known existed. Naomi enduring humiliation. While he was halfway across the world, the realization followed him through customs, through the private terminal, and into the waiting black SUV that carried him into the city. Daniel Cho sat across from him, reviewing information collected overnight. The original video has been viewed more than 3 million times, Daniel said quietly. Most people support Naomi, but the comments are still overwhelming. Ethan remained silent. His attention focused on a different report. Medical records. Appointment confirmations. Information Daniel had carefully gathered after learning about the pregnancy. Every page felt like another reminder of moments Ethan had missed. Doctor visits. Milestones. Photographs. Months of a life growing without him there to witness it. For the first time in years, the powerful businessman who always seemed to have complete control felt something unfamiliar. Regret. The vehicle stopped briefly at a red light. Ethan looked outside. The city moved as it always had. People hurried to work. Coffee shops opened their doors. Life continued normally. Yet for him, nothing felt normal anymore. "Where is Naomi now?" he finally asked. Daniel glanced at his tablet. She should be arriving at her second job within the hour. A community resource center on the west side. Ethan nodded once. The vehicle continued forward. Meanwhile, Naomi stood behind a reception desk helping visitors complete paperwork. The center served families struggling with housing, employment, and childcare. The pay was modest, but she loved the work. Helping people reminded her that kindness still existed despite everything she had experienced recently. Most of the staff had already seen the viral video. Some offered sympathy. Others simply treated her the way they always had. Naomi appreciated both responses. She wanted normalcy more than attention. Around mid-morning, she stepped outside for fresh air. The autumn breeze felt cool against her skin. She rested on a nearby bench and closed her eyes for a moment. The past few days had been exhausting. Suddenly, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "You should not be sitting out here in this weather." Naomi froze. Her eyes opened. Slowly. For a second, she thought she was imagining things. Then she saw him standing a few feet away. Ethan Romano. The same dark suit. The same steady presence. Yet something in his expression was different. Less guarded. More human. Naomi rose to her feet, so quickly she nearly lost her balance. Ethan moved instinctively, stopping only after realizing she had regained her footing. Neither spoke. The city noise seemed to fade around them. Months of distance hung in the silence between them. Questions. Regrets. Unspoken explanations. Then Ethan's eyes drifted downward. For the first time, there was no screen. No video. No photograph. Only reality. His gaze settled on the unmistakable curve of her stomach. Emotion flashed across his face before he could hide it. Naomi felt tears gathering immediately. Ethan looked back into her eyes. 7 months, he said softly. It was not an accusation. It was heartbreak. Naomi swallowed hard. "I tried to tell you." Ethan nodded slowly. "I know." For several seconds, neither moved. Then a tiny movement shifted beneath Naomi's hand. Their daughter kicked. Both of them felt it. The world seemed to stop. Ethan stared in complete silence. And in that moment, every meeting, every contract, every responsibility that had consumed his life suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the child waiting to meet him. For the next hour, neither Ethan nor Naomi returned to the conversation they should have had months ago. Some wounds were too complicated for immediate answers. Instead, they walked slowly through a nearby park while the city moved around them. Autumn leaves drifted across the sidewalks, and children laughed in the distance near a playground. For the first time in a very long time, Ethan allowed himself to focus on something other than responsibility. His attention remained entirely on Naomi. He noticed the careful way she walked, the exhaustion she tried to hide, the protective instinct behind every movement she made. Each observation deepened the regret already weighing on his heart. Eventually, they sat on a bench overlooking a small pond. Naomi rested both hands on her stomach, while Ethan remained unusually quiet beside her. Most people assumed Ethan Romano always knew exactly what to say. Today was different. Today he felt like a man trying to understand how much he had missed. Have you picked a name? He finally asked. Naomi smiled faintly. Not yet. Ethan nodded. Good. She looked at him curiously. Why is that good? A rare smile appeared on his face. Because I would like to help. Naomi stared at him for several seconds. Something about the simplicity of that answer broke through months of frustration. No promises. No grand speeches. Just a father wanting to be involved. Before she could respond, Ethan's phone vibrated. Daniel. Ethan glanced at the screen but did not answer immediately. Naomi noticed. You should take it. Ethan sighed quietly before accepting the call. Daniel's voice came through the speaker. I thought you should know that the man from the video has been giving interviews. Ethan's expression remained calm. What kind of interviews? He is enjoying the attention. He claims he did nothing wrong. He says people are too sensitive. Naomi lowered her eyes. Hearing those words hurt more than she expected. Ethan noticed immediately. He ended the call after thanking Daniel and slipped the phone back into his pocket. For several moments, silence returned. Then Ethan turned toward Naomi completely. Look at me. She hesitated before meeting his eyes. You spent days wondering if those people were right. Naomi did not answer. She did not need to. The truth was written across her face. Ethan continued. They were wrong. His voice was calm and steady. You are carrying our daughter. You have worked 2 jobs while protecting her. You have attended every appointment alone. You have done everything possible to give her a good life. There is nothing about that deserving of ridicule. Naomi felt tears gathering again. Ethan gently placed his hand over hers. The problem was never you. The words settled deep inside her. Not because they erased the pain. They did not. But because for the first time since the video appeared online, someone had spoken to her with complete certainty instead of sympathy. Across the pond, a flock of birds lifted into the afternoon sky. Naomi watched them disappear into the clouds. Beside her, Ethan remained silent. Yet his thoughts had already begun moving elsewhere. Back to the shopping center. Back to the laughter. Back to the man who had built his moment of popularity by humiliating a pregnant woman. Ethan was not interested in revenge. He was interested in accountability. And while Tyler Brooks still believed the story was fading away, events had already begun unfolding beyond his control. 3 days later, the shopping center looked exactly the same. Families carried shopping bags. Teenagers gathered around the food court. Employees rushed between shifts. To most people, it was just another ordinary afternoon. Tyler Brooks certainly thought so. Standing near the restaurant entrance, he enjoyed the attention that had followed him since the video went viral. A local podcast had invited him to speak. Several online personalities had reposted his comments. Even though criticism continued to grow, Tyler convinced himself that controversy meant popularity. He laughed with coworkers as if nothing had happened. What he did not know was that several floors above the food court, a private meeting was already taking place. The shopping center's ownership group had gathered unexpectedly that morning. Executives who rarely visited the property sat around a polished conference table reviewing reports. Customer complaints had flooded in by the thousands. Sponsors had expressed concern. Community organizations had issued statements. The situation was no longer being viewed as a simple online argument. It had become a question of values. At precisely 2 o'clock that afternoon, another visitor arrived. Ethan Romano entered the building through a private entrance accompanied only by Daniel Cho. No large entourage. No dramatic announcement. Just 2 men walking calmly through the corridors. Yet wherever Ethan went, people seemed to sense something different about him. Confidence. Purpose. Quiet authority. Daniel handed him a tablet displaying recent headlines. Ethan barely glanced at it. His attention remained focused elsewhere. Downstairs. Near the food court. Near the place where Naomi had been publicly humiliated. Meanwhile, Tyler continued speaking loudly to a group of employees. People are still talking about me, he said proudly. I guess the internet loves a good joke. Several co-workers exchanged uncomfortable looks. The story no longer felt funny to most people. Before anyone could respond, the atmosphere changed. Conversations began slowing. Heads started turning. One by one, people noticed a man approaching across the food court. Ethan Romano moved through the crowd without hurry. His dark suit contrasted sharply against the bright storefronts around him. Beside him, Daniel remained silent. Tyler frowned slightly. He did not recognize Ethan immediately. To him, this was just another customer. Can I help you? Tyler asked with forced confidence. Ethan stopped a few feet away. For several seconds, he simply studied the man standing before him. Not with anger, not with hostility, with disappointment. The kind of disappointment that carried far more weight than shouting ever could. The surrounding conversations faded into silence. Even strangers sensed something important was happening. Ethan finally spoke. "You are Tyler Brooks." Tyler nodded cautiously. "Who wants to know?" Ethan glanced briefly around the crowded food court before returning his attention to him. "I came because there is someone you should have treated with more respect." Tyler laughed nervously. "Look, if this is about that video, people are blowing it way out of proportion." Ethan remained completely calm. A woman walked through this building carrying a child. The room seemed to grow quieter with every word. "Instead of showing kindness, you chose cruelty." Tyler opened his mouth to respond, but for the first time since the video appeared online, no words came. Because standing before him was a man whose presence seemed to silence the entire room. And somewhere deep inside, Tyler was beginning to realize that this conversation was not going to end the way he expected. Tyler forced a smile, but the confidence that had carried him through countless interviews was beginning to crack. The food court had gone completely silent. Employees stopped working. Customers paused in the middle of conversations. Even people who had no idea who Ethan Romano was could feel the weight of the moment. Tyler glanced around and laughed nervously. "Look, I already told people. It was a joke." Ethan studied him for several seconds. "A joke?" His voice remained calm. "Tell me something. If your mother had walked through this building and someone treated her that way, would you still call it a joke?" Tyler's smile disappeared. Ethan took a step closer, not in a threatening way, but with the quiet certainty of someone who understood exactly what he was saying. "If your sister was carrying a child and strangers laughed at her appearance, would you call it a joke?" No answer came. The crowd remained silent. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, he seemed aware that this was no longer about internet attention. This was about character. Ethan continued. "The easiest thing in the world is to be cruel. It takes no effort, no discipline, no integrity." He glanced briefly around the room. "Kindness requires far more strength." Several people lowered their eyes. Others nodded quietly. Ethan then reached into his jacket pocket and removed his phone. A photograph appeared on the screen. He held it where Tyler could see it. It was an ultrasound image. Tyler frowned in confusion. Ethan's expression softened for the first time since arriving. "The woman you mocked is carrying my daughter." The words landed like a thunderclap. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Tyler simply stared at him. The color drained from his face. Around the food court, shocked whispers began spreading from table to table. Employees exchanged stunned glances. Several customers who recognized Naomi from the viral video covered their mouths in disbelief. Ethan looked down at the image for a moment before returning his attention to Tyler. "But understand something very clearly." His voice remained steady. "I am not here because she is carrying my child." Tyler blinked. Ethan continued. "I am here because she deserved respect before anyone knew that fact." The room fell silent again. That sentence hit harder than any accusation could have, because everyone understood the truth behind it. Naomi's value had never depended on who loved her. It had never depended on money, status, or influence. She deserved dignity simply because she was a human being. At that exact moment, several executives emerged from the corridor overlooking the food court. The shopping center's regional director stepped forward. His expression was serious. "Mr. Brooks," he said quietly, "we need to speak with you immediately." Tyler looked from the executives to Ethan and back again. The reality of the situation finally settled over him. The attention he had enjoyed for days was disappearing. The laughter was gone. The applause was gone. All that remained were the consequences of a choice he had made in front of thousands of people. Ethan said nothing further. He had not come to humiliate anyone. He had come to make a point. And judging by the silence that filled the entire building, everyone had heard it. 6 weeks later, the first snow of the season drifted gently across the city. Naomi stood near the window of a private hospital room, watching white flakes settle on rooftops and parked cars below. The world outside seemed quieter than usual, softer somehow. Behind her, a small bassinet rested beside the bed. Inside slept a healthy baby girl wrapped in a pale pink blanket. Every few minutes, Naomi found herself looking over just to make sure this beautiful new reality was still real. Months of uncertainty had finally given way to something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Peace. Ethan sat nearby, his jacket folded over the back of a chair. The phone that once dominated every hour of his life remained untouched beside him. For once, business meetings could wait. Contracts could wait. Everything could wait. His daughter could not. He looked down at the tiny child sleeping peacefully and smiled. It was not the smile of a powerful businessman. It was the smile of a father completely captivated by someone who weighed less than 8 pounds and had already changed his entire world. Naomi watched him quietly. You have been staring at her for an hour. Ethan glanced up. I know. You should probably rest. He looked back at the bassinet. I do not think I can. Naomi laughed softly. It was a sound he had missed more than he realized. The past weeks had brought many changes. Ethan had rearranged his schedule. He had attended every medical appointment after returning home. He had listened more than he spoke. Most importantly, he had shown up. Not because of obligation. Because he wanted to. Across the city, life had moved on from the viral video that had once dominated headlines. New stories replaced old ones. Public attention shifted elsewhere. Yet some lessons remained. Community organizations used the incident as a reminder about dignity and empathy. Schools discussed the impact words could have on others. Even people who never met Naomi found themselves thinking twice before making assumptions about strangers. As for Tyler Brooks, he eventually released a public apology. Whether it came from regret or reflection, nobody could say for certain. What mattered was that he finally understood something he should have known from the beginning. Every person carries a story invisible to the people around them. Back in the hospital room, the baby stirred slightly. Ethan immediately rose from his chair and moved closer. Naomi smiled as she watched him gently place a finger into the tiny hand reaching from the blanket. Their daughter wrapped her fingers around his without hesitation. The room fell completely silent. No reporters, no cameras, no crowds. Just a mother, a father, and a child beginning her life surrounded by love. Ethan looked at Naomi. Naomi looked at their daughter. For a long moment, neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. Everything that needed to be said already existed in that room. Outside, snow continued falling over the city. Inside, a family quietly began a new chapter. And on that winter afternoon, the world offered one final reminder that a person's worth is never determined by appearance, status, or the opinions of strangers. It is revealed by character, protected by dignity, and remembered through kindness. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.